Now it's my pleasure to introduce Prashanth Chandrasekar, CEO of Stack Overflow, who will take us into a case study that focuses on how that company responded when generative AI threatened to disrupt its entire business model. Prashanth, welcome to Future Compute. The stage is yours.
Hello, everyone. Wonderful to be back in Cambridge. It's a real pleasure to speak with all of you. My name is Prashanth. As Amy pointed out, I've been the CEO of Stack since 2019. So I've been at the company for about 5 years. Prior to that, I was in the cloud space at Rackspace, leading a lot of the third-party cloud businesses around AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud. So how many of you know Stack Overflow, just very quickly in the room? Okay, that's maybe about 75, 80% of the room. So that's it's a pretty good representative sample. We're the world's largest software developer community. We have about 100 million people all around the world, and as you can see, 185 countries that have been using our services since 2008. So we've been around since about 16 years or so. And that is what, on the left side here, is what most people know us for, which is the 59 to 60 million questions and answers on every possible technology topic. You know, a cloud topic, a JavaScript question, you name it, it's all on Stack. And the 100 million people are exchanging information, and we've created this really, really fantastic curated data set, which has been proven to be very valuable to help folks around the world in the ecosystem, and now in a very different context. The other parts of our company, Stack Overflow for Teams, we have 15,000 organizations, including Salesforce and others, that are customers of ours that use Stack Overflow's platform inside their organization in a private enterprise context, because the needs for sharing and collaborating are even deeper and higher in the context of companies. We also have an advertising focus, obviously, because we have very large traffic, so people advertise their products and their companies. And then most recently, we announced our AI capability called Overflow AI, which are generative AI capabilities that sit both on the public platform as well as on Stack Overflow for Teams, where it brings together all this knowledge from both these platforms to surface the right place and the right content at the moment of need for the user. And then most recently, on the right side, we announced what is known as Stack Overflow or Overflow API, where companies and partners in the AI space have access to this massive data set to be able to do things like train their models, whether that's pre-training or post-training and so on. So that's a very quick view of the company, and I'll get to sort of how we got here. So we've talked, we had Dan obviously speak about a phenomenal sort of length of time and history, but there have been key moments along the way, everything from the PC world, where the world was very different after you first experienced that. We all remember that. Our first mobile experience, our internet experience, the first time a developer used Stack Overflow, it was no longer the same for them. I used to write code as a computer science and engineering student, back in the late 90s, and for me it was textbooks and so on, as most traditional people had done so. But after Stack Overflow, the world changed. People just leveraged copy pasting and leveraging bits and pieces to debug and solve their problems on a daily basis. Similarly, cloud changed how we thought about access to compute, and the ability to create new products absolutely exploded. And then, of course, most recently, with not only remote work, which has just completely democratized access to people and talent around the world, but also, of course, with AI. I think the ChatGPT moment of November 2022 will be one of those moments that we'll all remember forever. So I think this progression, while simple on a slide, I think has been building up for a while. And there's this compounding set of effects that have been going on, whether that is all this data being collected, the access to raw compute. We've talked a lot about things like GPUs and why they're going to be so scarce and so important, and that's why they're so expensive these days. All this has been compounding to a place where the open internet, et cetera, has made this moment possible. And I think that's why it's hard to sort of actually put things into sort of perspective when this is decades worth of change sort of coming to fruition, including things like neural networks, and transformer technology, which we've been talking about for a while. So the learning curve for AI is absolutely kind of intimidating. The amount of progress that's happening on literally a daily basis is staggering for even the most erudite of the folks in this space, because it is, the number of papers that you have to read, the latest developments, it is absolutely mind-boggling. And what is also very clear is that, especially in the context of code generation and developers, the ability to create a first draft of anything that is like reasonable, I think is fantastic. I think for somebody who is an entry-level programmer, there are risks about using this as a crutch, but at the same time, it just sort of gives you the superpower to get going, where you may have had to sort of work for it for a while. We can talk about the long-term, short-term implications of that, but that is, I think, an important aspect. What is also very clear as people are learning about this is, and Dan pointed this out, is that humans are absolutely important in this context, because if you don't have the human in the loop, you lose a lot of ability to trust what's coming out of these things. And I'll explain that. And trust is a very, very important concept, which also Juan mentioned this morning. And so this draft, the first draft, while important, the need for really solid data and knowledge and information that ultimately is at the heart of any AI system is the most important aspect. It's very clear, right, at this point. And where does all that information and knowledge come from? It comes from humans. So we have to create incentives for people to actually create new knowledge and create and develop and invent new things for that to ultimately make its way into the machines that Dan mentioned. So we have this large developer community. We spoke to them every year. We conduct a survey. We're doing this year's survey. We just rolled this out yesterday. Last year, we asked our 100 million people, and about 100,000 people responded. That's a decent sample set. And we asked them a whole bunch of questions about AI. But these couple of data points stood out to us especially. The first question was, how many of you plan on using AI tools for software development? And how many of you are currently using these AI tools? 70% said they were planning on doing that or were already using it. This is a year ago. I suspect this number, when we ask the same question this year, which we have, is going to be closer to 90-something percent, 95%. So that was fascinating. The second stat that stood out was how much do you trust the accuracy of this content? And only about 40% said they either somewhat trust or highly trust in combination what was coming out of these tools. So that really stood out to us, and trust was the heart of the feedback from the developer community. And as fellow developers or people in your teams, etc., we are a skeptical bunch. You're not going to take it at face value, especially if you're sitting in a bank trying to roll out enterprise-grade software in production. Are you really going to trust what's coming out of these machines? I don't know. I don't think so. So that was a very key insight for us. Another key set of themes that came out of our surveys is people are really concerned about their jobs. I mean, really, really concerned. Developers, they're wondering, is my job going to be around? A lot of the, what we hear in the social media circles when people reach out to us is around this topic. And contrary to much of the doomsdayers out there, I actually have somewhat of a contrarian view. In terms of, if you look at the history of the number of developers that have existed, and we have pretty good kind of signal on the subject. Even during Stack Overflow, when we were founded in 2008, there was this group of folks that said, okay, now that everybody can copy paste, I guess you don't really need that many developers. It's so easy now to to write code. Or in the 2000 era, when people started sending jobs to lower cost locations back then through the BPO era, like India and other places, people say, oh, I guess all the jobs are leaving, so I guess it's just going to be done out of the lower cost places. But throughout this history of time, we've only seen an increase in the number of developers. Why? And the definition of a developer may change, and we fully expect that to actually change going forward, which is why people are learning about things like prompt engineering on Stack Overflow. And so an entry-level programmer graduating from MIT, I think it'll be an interesting set of circumstances for them to say, they're actually going to be in a pretty good spot. They can leverage the power tools or as was mentioned earlier, along with their fundamental learning, and they're going to be pretty useful in the context of adding value to a tech company or a technology organization. But I think it's just going to increase the number of people wanting to enter this space, lower the barrier to entry. You don't need to be an MIT engineer to actually go into writing code. You can be anybody. And as long as you know and you spend the time to actually prompt systems and learn how to do that well, you can enter the space. So I actually believe maybe in the near term there may be a negative impact, but in the long term, we believe that it's going to actually explode the number of people interested in writing code. And last point, that the number of problems to go solve and the number of things to go write software for far exceed the number of people that actually exist to do that well. So I think that's an important point. If we believe technology is going to keep moving, you have to believe that fundamentally. So, that system, ultimately, through this tech transformation, it might create disruption, no doubt, but all this emerging ideas and startups that are being created, there's an absolute explosion, as you've seen, with every company looking to build new products now, especially in the AI context. We believe there's going to be absolutely a big surge in demand for quote-unquote developers. Okay, in the broader context also, several things stand out to us as in the sense of what's happening in the industry. Number one, we believe cost management is really, really going to be important here because it's extremely expensive to train these models. These chips are expensive, et cetera. Number two, these foundational models are becoming absolutely a commodity. You can see every week there's a new model that's ultimately sort of trying to beat the statistics and the benchmarks of the prior, whether it's an open source or closed source. Personalization based on the context of the user, I think, is an absolute source of differentiation and a superpower. If you know a 15-year history of how users have engaged on your platform, like we do, we can serve them the right level of context based on their capabilities and what we've learned about them at the moment of question. We also believe folks like Juan and others and whoever are enterprise companies will question the ROI of these systems. And I think there's a lot of there's always a pendulum that swings saying, okay, we're going to drive 30% efficiency immediately, and then the reality hits in, and then it's like more like 10% and 5%. And so there's a lot of questions, as I talk to CTOs of big banks, et cetera, that the pressures in the system to justify the tremendous amounts of spend, and this is not an enviable position to be in, because you've just taken a bet that this is going to make a big difference, while in reality, we believe it's going to take a little longer because of various reasons that we'll get into. And then finally, the legal debate, ethical debate continues, as was mentioned. There's tremendous amounts of conversation going on what's responsible AI, great question. The copyright, the IP, who really owns the data, we have a point of view on that, and so on. So as a function of that, we really do believe that the future, there's going to be huge focus on socially responsible AI. The AI companies are realizing that they can't just sort of use the content of the open internet and to do what they're trying to do. They have to work in concert with companies and companies, especially with big data sources, and we'll talk about what we've done on that to be able to generate the virtuous cycle that they need with humans in the loop. The race for accuracy, as I mentioned previously, is a huge, huge barrier because nobody's really going to use this and trust this in a bank, as an example, if they don't actually trust what's coming out of these models. The LLM wars is an absolute explosion. People, whether it's small language models, large language models, you've got hundreds of companies are building LLMs to be able to go and bring them to market for very specific applications. And ultimately, companies are absolutely going to care about things like data governance and privacy. And those are very much also rooted in things like attribution, to make sure that there's accountability ultimately. Because a user can, again, blame the tool. If somebody's using one of these tools, it is on the user if something goes wrong. So there's a tremendous amount of pressure in the system to make sure that you can trust what's coming out of these. And of course, all that is rooted in the community data that you're generating. So what did we do at Stack when all this happened? So we went and actually took our own data, and we took a bunch of open source models, and we have a tremendous amount of data, 16 years worth. And we effectively trained these open source models with our own data to see what effect would it have. This highly curated, highly accurate knowledge base actually created a fantastic increase in the level of accuracy of answers. So it was a 25 percentage point increase, which we felt, okay, that means high quality data sets actually do matter in generating better and accurate answers. And that was a huge, huge insight. We then came up with our own thesis around humans and AI coming together on our community, on the Stack Overflow community. Humans do a lot of great things. They create new knowledge, they validate, they connect the dots. AI does some amazing things, as we've learned, generative AI specifically. That's aggregations, semantic search, et cetera. And then that drives high trust attribution, accurate answers, personalization, as I pointed out, feedback loops. We've been in the upvote, downvote game for the past 16 years. So if you think about human reinforcement feedback, that's basically pre-built. And ultimately recognizing the people contributing this content to, recognizing them for ultimately what they've contributed. And ultimately, of course, our data is foundational to all of this. So that's been our philosophy as we've gone and built, as I described to you previously on our portfolio, Overflow AI, Overflow API. A lot of this has to do with our philosophy on humans and AI coming together on our platform. And the ecosystem, along with us, we have also responded to what has happened because there are only a few data sets that have actually mattered in the context of training these large language models with these big AI companies, whether that is the Reddits of the world or, of course, Stack, which is we're the specialized community around this, and other platforms. And these AI companies have been using the data to train their models, and ultimately humans are now we're beginning to sort of play a loop or a role in that loop because of that connection that I mentioned, which is you need human validated information to be able to do this well, and they've recognized that now, as I'll point out. So we actually started saying, how do we bring the best of all these worlds together to move progress forward, or how do we actually have progress in the space? And so we started having a lot of inbound conversations. When they started realizing, hey, accurate data makes a difference. We need to actually more formally and socially responsibly work with these big platforms that have content. We then decided to partner with a lot of these companies, and most recently we announced 2 partnerships, one with Google Cloud, with the Gemini product, back in February, and once most recently, last week, we announced one with OpenAI. So what are we doing? This is an example on the right side where you see Duet AI. Their names change often, but that's effectively Gemini, where you can see now any user on Gemini, when they ask a question, let's say, how do I do this on JavaScript? There's going to be a generative AI answer, but also you're going to see attributed sources from Stack Overflow, because the world's experts on every possible technology are on Stack Overflow. So the world's expert on JavaScript has answered this, let's say, 4 days ago or even 6 years ago, and that's going to show up, and you're going to trust that this answer is right before you just leverage the black box answer as you were doing previously. And this is very similar to the functionality of our own AI product when people come to Stack Overflow, whether that's the enterprise product or the public platform. So this is what we've done to partner. And so ultimately, this is the portfolio, as I explained. Our public data set and our public community, which has 100 million people, is the foundation of the company. Our Teams product sits on top of that, which leverages on top of that the Overflow AI capabilities that, again, brings both the AI strengths as well as the human strengths. And what that capability does is that for enterprises, they're able to have, again, attributed and summarized answers within their Stack Overflow for Teams platform, within their company, within their IDE or integrated development environment where people write code. So it's now showing up there. It shows up in Slack, again, with the same functionality. It shows up in Microsoft Teams. And so that, I think, is we've really integrated AI into the developer experience, especially in the enterprise space as well as the public platform. And to actually do a lot of things that have been useful to make it even friendlier for people to engage on Stack Overflow as a result of engaging with AI versus the human judgment in some cases. And then Overflow API, as I mentioned, which is partnering with these big AI companies so they can leverage our data formally in a socially responsible way and to give credit to the community user that created it, and so on. And then finally, of course, our advertising products, which is a function of our traffic that continues to be thriving, because when you have links on these platforms where the developer workflow has now evolved to, people come back to Stack to learn more about whatever answers that they're curious about. So that is ultimately what we've done, and this the journey to get to where we are. We've endured quite a bit since the ChatGPT moment, because people sort of were very quick to write us off as like, okay, that was like a company that's now going to get disrupted. And that was true if we didn't do anything, but we had to sort of organize very quickly. We carved out a portion of the company to go work on the philosophy I described. We carved out the same group of people who went and developed Overflow AI. We developed these partnerships. We moved pretty quickly because we said, okay, how do we solve the fundamental problems our users have when we went and talked to them through that survey? and how do we make sure that we have a productive role to play in this next era of AI? And these are the things that I just sort of explained to you today. As recently as last week, as I mentioned, we announced our OpenAI partnership. Our Overflow AI product is now in general availability, being purchased by companies, and we've got several other partnerships, upcoming here in the coming months that you'll hear about in the news. So that is. That's my talk, and AI and community. That's why I think we believe, we exist, and we're very pleased to play our part. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Prashanth.
Yep.
Have time for just a couple of questions here. And I have to say, it sounds like you're feeling pretty confident, pretty optimistic these days. But back in late 2022, 23, things must have been kind of wild at Stack Overflow, reconciling with all of this. So take us back to that moment and tell us how you as a company worked through that together and decided on a course of action.
Yeah. I went to HBS down the street, and one of my professors was Clayton Christensen, and he wrote a very famous book, The Innovator's Dilemma. And I remember when he explained that, he had a very specific. He said, "Look, history repeats itself. This is how companies that respond well, this is what they do, and companies that don't and ignore it, this is what they do." And it really it was just absolutely, this is an HBS case study. I mean, in many ways, because we had to effectively carve out an autonomous business unit, which is really what he would recommend if he were still alive. And we basically did that. We carved out literally 40 people and said, "Look, all we're doing is going to obsess about this." I personally took over product of the organization. And we basically went and built what is now known as Overflow AI, and we came up with this philosophy of humans and AI coming together. We talked to our user base, we did all these things. But while the rest of the company continued to do what it was doing, which is keeping the lights running, selling our products, getting ads posted on the website, etc. So I think the key thing was focus and an immediate sort of red team sort of effort, which was we have to act now immediately. And not with sort of a delegated sort of effort. This has to come from the top. And so it was a stressful time, but an exciting time, because we had to sort of redefine in many ways the company and our role, because people always went to Google. I typed a question, landed on a Stack Overflow link, and they copy pasted the answer and disappeared. Like that was typically the workflow for about 10 years. Now the workflow has changed. People have started going to ChatGPT. They've going to Gemini. They're going to wherever else. And so we should be where our users are. So why don't we do what I just showed you, which is ultimately what has been realized since. Let's go to where the users are, and let's also make sure that we have the virtuous cycles continue to be established. So that's effectively what we did.
Yeah, there's an audience question from online related to that, wanting to know, are you seeing any downward trends in participation on Stack Overflow, either in terms of reading or posting since November 2022?
Yeah, I would say the contributions, there was an immediate impact, about 15% when we saw the traffic actually go down like very quickly, as I pointed out in that last slide. And we saw that across the board. We saw that with contributions, we saw that with people asking questions, et cetera. But that stabilized as soon as we announced our strategy with what we were planning on doing with our products, and we started rolling out a large number of alpha users. Tens of thousands of users started leveraging our AI capabilities, search functionality. So it has stabilized, and now with these partnerships, as they go live, these hooks are coming back into Stack Overflow. So we expect, as an example, with both OpenAI and Google, if somebody goes into the AI tools and asks a question to either ChatGPT or into Gemini, and the AI is unable to answer the question, the relationship, the partnership we've created allows the user to post that question onto Stack Overflow directly from there. So we've noticed that there are a lot of scenarios where users are not able to get either comprehensive or complete answers or fully trustworthy answers. And so you still need to complete that. So where are you going to do it? You can go around it and sort of go to Google and come back to Stack and do it that way, or you can do it straight from that tool. And so we're trying to effectively, let's call it, recapture the lost kind of momentum from that, that late November 2022, but also to create new momentum, because as I mentioned, the number of people going to be using these tools are going to only increase.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I think we had a question in the back of the room. Yes.
Hi there. George Whitfield from the Martin Trust Center for MIT Entrepreneurship. You talked about these great new partnerships and new product that you launched, and I'm just curious for all the engineers out there who are interested in emerging challenges, what do you see as the biggest challenges right now that you face with, let's say, Overflow.ai, and where are you really investing most of your time and effort?
Yeah, I think, and your question is challenges within Stack or more broadly for them?
Within Stack, specifically in your product.
Got it. Yeah. I think for us, it's mostly around making sure there is clarity on, okay, what is this actually doing relative to all the other opportunities that people have or products that exist? So it's a common question that we hear is, hey, why would I use an AI capability from Stack Overflow if I've got something like GitHub Copilot, as an example? And I think they're very different sort of use cases and vantage points. We almost think of GitHub Copilot, and the world uses it as a code generation tool, which is like, okay, I'm training on the world's code, and I'm going to generate a piece of code that could be useful to you to go do X, Y, Z. For Stack Overflow, we are the context around all the code, right? We have all the information around the libraries being used. Why did you use this? Why did you create this? Why did you write it this way versus 15 more lines? So that context is fantastically useful in the ability to provide, from a Copilot standpoint, a very different vantage point. We're not interested in generating code. We're interested in effectively providing all the background information as almost like a librarian, if you will, in the moment of need so the person can learn. Because I think it's very important for people to learn versus blindly following some code gen thing that just using it without context. So I think our biggest challenge is explaining, because there's a lot of excitement about the space, et cetera, and sometimes when something gets so far ahead with something like ChatGPT, people are often confused about, okay, what are all the problems that I'm trying to solve? And don't I just need one? The answer is, there are different things that we're trying to solve for different people. So I would say that's one of the biggest ones. Yeah.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you for your excellent questions. That's all we have time for. Thank you so much, Prashanth, for coming and sharing your insights today.
Thank you, Amy. Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.